You ever get a new credit card in the mail and instantly think about all the things that you can now afford? Well, you ever put it to use and you reach the limit before you know it and the store clerk says, "Sorry, sir, your card has been declined." And you're like, "Oh, damn, didn't realize I spent that much." And maybe now you're in a little bit of a bind, or maybe not, but there will be consequences if you miss those payments, right? You see, although the credit card company cut you off, it did save you from digging a deeper hole for yourself. Well, apparently, when you take office, the president gets a new credit card, and it burns a hole in their pocket the same way it does for most people. But there are some differences. You see, there doesn't seem to be a limit. There's no creditor to decline a transaction. And evidently, there's no limit to the hole that you can dig either. And with regard to the consequences for missed payments, well, no worries. Someone else will take care of it. And they will. Those payments are passed on to someone that didn't even do any of the spending. And these days, that person, they're hardly getting any benefit from the spending either. But they will be responsible for those payments. And I'm talking about the American people, that's who. And if you live in America, I'm talking about you. And watch this. The U.S. National Credit Card just passed $31 trillion for the very first time in history. Happened last week. And payment is due. And here's how you are to make their payments. You see, you're paying 48% more for gas, 23% more in airfare, 20% more for beef, 16% more for furniture, 5% more for insurance premiums, almost 11% more for food, 8% more for electricity. You know, I just went through the McDonald's drive-thru yesterday with my son. Happy Meal, $5.99. Not the Big Mac meal, the Happy Meal for my 11-year-old. Not adult food, baby food. You get it though. I don't have to run down a list of things going up in price, but it is about to get worse. Did you know that? Yeah, get ready to shell out even more for some of your go-to items like electronics, clothing, toys, medical supplies, video games, and gas again, and food again. And that's whether you eat at home or out. Prices are rising for a number of reasons, but the printing of money to pay for the gross federal overspending, that's granddaddy number one. The federal government spent $3.1 trillion more than it received in 2020, and it spent $2.8 trillion more than it received the following year. Now, although spending has cooled a bit due to COVID cooling off, the deficit is still expected to grow by $1 trillion per year, every year, for the foreseeable future. Well, at least it's just $1 trillion, right? I mean, it's just one. Well, you know how much $1 trillion is? $1 trillion in $1 bills would measure 67,866 miles, stretching almost 3 times around the Earth's equator. In $100 bills, you could fill 4.5 Olympic-sized swimming pools. A paper released last week by Francesco Bianchi of Johns Hopkins University and Leonardo Malosi of the Chicago Fed, the findings in their paper placed the blame on government spending for the current sky-high rate of inflation. That's what they said. Massive government spending equals massive inflation. Now, federal spending, this is nothing new. It has always been a problem. But the spending, it really took off in recent years after Congress, they passed multiple rounds of COVID stimulus under both the Trump and Biden administrations. It didn't end with COVID though. The spending continued with Biden's $1 trillion infrastructure bill last year and this year's Inflation Reduction Act of about $740 billion. Despite the bill's name, it won't do a thing to curb inflation. Naming it anti-inflation, that's a joke. And they don't care if you even know it's a joke. It don't matter to them. They don't care. The Inflation Reduction Act amounts to hundreds of billions in new spending that will drive up inflation and prices, hammer small businesses and American manufacturing, increase the price of gas, and sick the IRS on its citizens, all while raising taxes on Americans in nearly every single tax bracket, including those who make less than $400,000 a year. Then, Biden announced he would cancel $10,000 to $20,000 in student loan debt for people making less than $125,000 each year individually, or $250,000 as a family. The Congressional Budget Office estimated Biden's plan would cost the government $400 billion. Some say way more. Now, it may sound good on the surface, depending on where you're coming from, especially if you were one of those students that got some relief, and that might even cause you to vote for him again. And that's what he was banking on anyway. I mean, when it comes to politicians, don't be fooled. They don't care about you. I mean, if they don't make money or if they don't get votes, it don't get done. And watch this. That debt ain't canceled at all, but rather it's just moved onto the government's books. It puts taxpayers on the hook for that amount. All taxpayers. And it doesn't matter who you voted for either. But really, by taking on this debt, they'll just print more money to cover it, driving inflation even harder and higher. Okay, so sure, you may not have to make those payments each month, but you are now paying $5 for gas, $10 for the $5 footlong, and $20 for a movie ticket. Oh, and then there's the billions of dollars in US support to Ukraine. I mean, sure, we're helping them defeat Russia, but it's also putting America on track to funding Ukraine's entire national budget this year. And here's the crazy part, watch this. Just last week, the US Senate passed a short-term government funding bill to avert a shutdown of our government. Did you know that? You know, our own government runs out of money so often, it doesn't even make the news anymore. And we're out there footing the bill for another country's government. We can't even pay our own bills. Biden is spending money in Ukraine that America doesn't have, while Americans are suffering. All Americans. And it gets weirder. Biden's party is actually using the Federal Reserve as a scapegoat for inflation, when it's their spending spree that's put the Fed in a very difficult position, interfering with its ability to manage inflation. I mean, how can the Fed manage inflation while the government spending is what's fueling it? Yet, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell is feeling pretty good about his chances of bringing the economy back to normal. And I hope he does. But what do we do in the meantime? How do we manage rising costs of daily living? How do you protect your wealth? How do we protect our wealth from being destroyed by inflation? It's pretty simple, really, but it'll take some different thinking. It's all about positioning. As the everyday citizen, the average consumer, you're getting screwed because you're on the wrong side of this thing. But you can position yourself on the right side of it. And here's what I mean. You see, the government can continue to rack up debt because they know over time, inflation will pay it down for them. You see, inflation, it's an equal opportunity currency destroyer. It destroys the purchasing power of your president's money in the same way it's destroying yours. And it destroys your money in the same way it destroys the money that you borrow. You see, the government, they understand this, so they borrow. I mean, better to destroy someone else's money than yours, right? Well, you can play the same game. You can borrow that of which depreciates in times of inflation to purchase things that appreciate in times of inflation. That's the positioning I'm talking about. So all you have to do is ask yourself, what's appreciating during these inflationary times that you can invest in? Well, I mentioned a bunch of them already, right? I'm talking about food, energy, gasoline, housing. You can invest in all of those. But there's only one of those the average person can borrow money to make that investment. That's the positioning equation, right? Borrow that of which depreciates in times of inflation to purchase things that appreciate in times of inflation. I mean, that's how the system wins, and it always wins. That's what they do. And if you want to win, that's what you do. And the only one of those things the average person can borrow money to make that investment in is real estate. Weird how it always comes down to that, isn't it? Using other people's money, a depreciating asset, to buy housing, an appreciating asset. And preferably one that generates an income too, because during times of inflation, that income will appreciate also. That's how you not just survive this bugged out time we're living in. It's how you can come out way ahead once this thing blows over. And it will. Winter, it doesn't last forever. Spring is coming, but by the time it gets here, it might be too late for you. Or at the very least, you might have missed out on a ton of opportunity. So get positioned correctly and do that right now. And if you got something in mind that'll position yourself better than what I just went through, let me know below. I'm open. I don't know everything. What do you got? Share in the comments. I want to know. And do us all a favor. Keep your opinions of the problems to yourself. We all know what they are. We've discussed the problems ad nauseum over the last few years. Share your solutions. I mean, we all need to stop focusing on what's happening and focus on what we want to have happen. Do that, and everything's going to be all right. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Take care.